I've missed you all through the summer. And back. So it's a celebration this morning with being able to have coffee and tea and cold water. We've been doing cold water, but coffee and tea, and Carol made some the blueberry muffins and the cookies, and just nice to be able to celebrate food again, I guess, and have everybody together. So we welcome you to the beginning of our 2022-2023. Wow, that's hard to believe. Year of Tuesdays With, our 6th year of doing this lecture series. It's been really a special part of what's been happening with the Friends of the Georgetown Library. Third Tuesday of each month, and I'll mention it again at the end, but there's a schedule back there from now through May. The third Tuesday of every month we have a special presentation, all different kinds of topics, focusing mostly on the Georgetown community, whether it be nature or history or just general good stuff that's happening here, and so glad that you're able to be a part of that. We've called this since the very beginning, and most of you have heard this spiel before, Tuesdays With, based on the 1997 bestseller Tuesdays with Morrie, which is a beautiful story of a relationship between a professor and a student that continued far beyond the 18 to 21-year-old relationship to one that went on all through life, all the way up to the passing of the professor, actually. And just a beautiful story. And that's our purpose, is continuing learning all through our lives. You can't avoid that, but it's nice to do it in a way that's sort of systematic and intentional rather than accidental, and usually it is by accidents that you learn different things as we grow older. So again, welcome, and I know you'll enjoy today's presentation. We're very pleased to have with us Joy Brown. Joy has a master's degree in biology and coastal zone studies, and over 20 years of experience in marsh ecology and restoration throughout the Southeast United States. She is currently the Marine Program Manager for the South Carolina chapter of the Nature Conservancy. She joined the Nature Conservancy in 2008 when she created the Marine Program and started the Nature Conservancy's oyster reef restoration projects. That restoration work quickly evolved to focus on using nature for marsh shoreline stabilization projects, which also provides habitat for over 100 marine species, including crabs, shrimp, and fish. Since 2015, she's been working with local communities to mitigate flood impacts using nature. She's here today to talk about the first and largest living shoreline project in South Carolina, which is right here in Georgetown, the Boyd Living Shoreline Project, which will be built at Morgan Park. And I hope that you'll not only enjoy this in terms of a presentation, but also pay a visit to Morgan Park if you've never been there. It is really a beautiful location. So Joy, welcome, and it's great to have you here with us. We look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Bob. Good morning, everyone. If at any point you have problems hearing me, please do something, let me know. Make a motion. But before I get into the presentation, I just want to note, I did bring some flyers. If you are interested, they are on the back table. Feel free to take one. It's about the project. And we also have a big poster at the Maritime Museum. There is a website for this. So the poster at the Maritime Museum has a QR code. That's a little square that you can take a picture of with your phone. It'll take you directly to the website. I'll also share the website during my presentation today. So it is fairly simple to get to, but there are a couple different places where you can find more information about this project. After today, I would hope that you all will go and talk to at least one person about this project, making folks more aware and helping to spread the word. And then my cards are also in the back, so feel free to take one. Contact me if you have any questions after today. All right? So before I jump into the presentation, I did want to ask, has anybody not been to Morgan Park before? Not been to Morgan Park? Okay, couple folks. Are you familiar with East Bay Park, where East Bay Park is located? Okay, so it's not, if you're going down Main Street in Georgetown and you go until you can't go anymore, on the right, there's East Bay Park, which feels very big. And that is where there's a boat ramp, There's a dog walk, a playground, and if you keep going around the corner, there will be an access to a parking lot. It's an unpaved parking lot. You park there and you walk out towards the water, and that's where Morgan Park is located. So the image you see here is actually a picture taken from the water looking at Morgan Park, which is more of a passive area. There is a picnic shelter there and this slightly raised viewing pavilion. So our project will be taking place out here in the water, and a portion of it will be closer to the shoreline, just so you have that perspective. So I think you mentioned our North Coast resilience work that we have been doing in Horry and Georgetown County since 2015, and that was focused on community input, telling us what they felt were some issues. And out of that, we have actually cited some projects, and we've continued that work and cited projects in the one here in Georgetown. We've also cited some work in Andrews and Conway. So the project in Conway is now at the national level for some FEMA funding through a program called BRIC, Building Resilient Infrastructures in Communities. So hopefully we'll get that one funded. That's a over $2 million project working with the town of Conway. So today we're going to be focused on the first and largest living shoreline project in South Carolina. The project scope is for 1 acre. That's also the largest for us. Before we get into that, who is unfamiliar with the Nature Conservancy? Okay, few folks. All right, so the Nature Conservancy is a global nonprofit with international and U.S. chapters with a mission to conserve the land and waters on which all life depends. It's a few words for such a lofty goal. And in an effort to develop a strategic plan to support the world's human population, we've developed a set of conservation priorities from the global level down to our state level efforts. So our conservation agenda was developed with the intent of securing food and water for humans in light of the expected 9 billion people on Earth by 2050. Our mission is to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends, with a vision for a world where diverse life thrives and people are conserving nature for animals and humans. The Conservancy has a presence in over 70 countries and every one of the 50 states in the US. So our conservation strategy was developed at the global scale, and in the table on the screen, you can actually see our North American strategies. So those strategies were used to shape our state priorities, and our state priorities are meant to feed back up into those North American strategies to note significant levels of work accomplished. So the Boyd Living Shoreline project I'll be speaking of today will feed back into our nature-based solution adaptation mostly, but also has a slight connection to our sustainable fisheries work. Okay, so in the South Carolina chapter, we've developed a set of 6 strategic pillars under which all our work is couched. So today I'll be discussing the work led by our marine team that falls within our resilience and adaptation pillar, and to a lesser extent, the sustained fisheries pillar as well. But there's definitely a connection because our living shoreline projects and fisheries, as you mentioned, support over 100 different species. So those are species that, commercial interest, crabs, shrimps, blue crab, but there are a ton of other crabs that use these areas, as well as commercially and recreationally important species of fish. We see a lot of juvenile species coming into the area to find protection. We see some bigger fish coming in to eat those little things. So we do see a lot of impact and support of our recreational fisheries, as well as every time I feel like I put a project out, I start seeing more and more crab traps show up around my project site. So they know what's going on. There's a lot more blue crabs that come in and start using those areas, which is one of our commercial commodities in the Southeast. So most folks are aware of the Conservancy. They are familiar with our land conservation efforts. But our marine-based programs have been in place almost as long. So we've been working in South Carolina for over 50 years, and the marine program was established about 15 years ago when I showed up. So first I'll go into a little background so that we can, before we speak specifically to the Boyd project, to make sure we're all on the same page. All right, so to get us all on the same page, I want to start with a definition of what we had in mind when we were initiating this project. So has anybody heard of a living shoreline before I came here today? One, couple folks, okay. So what we had in mind was a living shoreline is a method of stabilizing a shoreline from erosion while maintaining a land and water connection, so that it is the ability to move back and forth and to feed into each other. So the inspiration for our project is the project that you actually see here on the screen. This is Project Green Shores in Pensacola, Florida. So the project was developed to reduce the erosion and impacts to a main downtown highway that comes off of the Pensacola Bay Bridge leading into downtown. So there's a section of rock-based, where there's actually a bunch of birds sitting on out there, rock-based breakwater, and then they actually brought in sediment and made little islands and planted them with vegetation. So the living shoreline has successfully reduced the impacts to the road, but has also created a secondary market where people come for bird watching, they rent kayaks, they go there and they fish. And the local Pensacola outfitters have found kind of a boom in the business after this project showed up. And it has actually been so successful, they have continued to expand it. So I think there's 3 phases of it now. And so that's where we were drawing our inspiration from for this project. So we're also using the lessons learned from our own living shoreline projects in South Carolina. Since 2009, we've been installing and monitoring projects along the coast to test materials and then test the designs. So we've completed 14 small-scale projects, averaging in length between 50 and 250 feet. So the map shows the location of those 14 pilot projects between Waddle Island and Winyah Bay. And of these, the majority are living shoreline projects, with the remainder being our original oyster restoration efforts for habitat value. So that's when we originally started, it was just what kind of materials can we use, what kind of animals are using them, how many oysters can we grow, that kind of thing. So I've highlighted an example of our work on the right. So that is the Goldbug Island Living Shoreline Oyster Reef Project. And that was installed in 2016 on the intercoastal waterway between Breach Inlet and the Charleston Harbor. And to date, it's the longest reef that we have installed, measuring 225 feet long, 4 feet wide, but only 1.5 feet high. So they're like little speed bumps in the water, if you will. So this reef was made of wooden pallets stacked with oyster castles and bagged shell. And over our 6 years of monitoring the project, we've noted significant oyster recruitment and growth with 3-inch oysters in less than a year, and continued oyster recruitment on the reef. So that to us is showing signs of a healthy situation, a healthy project. But actually the money's in the marsh growth. So I'm gonna dive a little bit more into this project so you can just get a sense of what we're trying to base this work on. So to get you situated, again, so the Charleston Harbor, Sullivan's Island, and then where the Ben Sawyer Swing Bridge is where Goldbug Island. It's where that pink star is over there. That's where this project is located. So there's a lot of water moving through the area, and actually quite a bit of boat wake. So I was at the project one day. This is during a low tide, so most pictures I'll show you are at low tide, so you can actually see the project. But this was a holiday weekend. So the project is located right here. You can see these buoys. So this means you're supposed to slow down, so you're not causing as much wake. Those tend to be areas where we see a lot of erosion from boat wake, where people are on plane and slowing down, or at a slow speed and starting to speed back up. So I think I'll show a picture in a minute, but basically there's a causeway that comes down and there's 2 docks, and it's right on the intercoastal. So this does see quite a bit of energy. There's a lot of water moving through, so it sees a tidal energy, but it is really seeing this boat wake, which is very similar to what we're seeing over where Morgan Park is located here in Georgetown. Okay, so this is a picture of the reef right after it was installed. Okay, so this is the pre-installation conditions, and then I just want to show our partners. So the East Cooper Outboard Motor Club actually owns the upland property, and they have a state grant, so they actually do own down to, I believe, the high tide, low tide area. That's very rare. But in this situation, they have an easement with Low Country Land Trust on their property. So that's how we made the connection with them, was through our partner of the Low Country Land Trust. And then we did receive grant funding from the Wildlife Conservation Society's Climate Adaptation Fund to put the project in, and also a little bit of supplemental funding from Duke Energy at the time. So you can see the site. There is a little bit of grass, but there is a big mud flat. Again, there's a lot of energy. I'm standing on a causeway, so there's a lot of energy getting pushed up, and it kind of vortexes around, I guess, in the area, and has made this very pluff mud. Everybody knows what pluff mud is, right? Very pluff mud situation where if you were to walk off in there, you would sink up to your hips, okay? So it's very high water content in the mud. And then again, they have a dock that comes out just off to the right of this picture, as well as another one on the other side of the causeway. So this is a drone picture that we took the day of the install. I had almost 200 volunteers out there. So in order to install it, we had to stand on what we call walking boards, which at the time were full sheets of plywood, overlapped about 3 inches. And I had way down on the end a bunch of younger folk from the Citadel, and had them just kind of lay me a straight line out to a certain point with that overlapping. So they could see the plywood, but the very next person behind them, the mud and the water kind of comes up. So you have to know where you're walking. You don't want to fall off that plywood. By the way, my state director did. We rescued him, but he did go down pretty deep. So what you're seeing here is they, again, like I said, they took these plywood out, and then there's 2 rows of people, and they're kind of offset from each other, and they passed the material down by hand. And it started with pallets that were wrapped in a fabric, like a geotextile fabric, something you would put in the bottom of your garden to keep the weeds out, something like that. And then we took these oyster castle blocks, which are concrete-based 4-walled structures, and we laid those down. And then we had dried shell that were in these plastic mesh bags that DNR uses, and we put those on top because it was less weight, and we needed to get to a certain height so that the oysters could start to grow, and we wouldn't lose it to the mud. But again, it's only 1.5 feet high. So these are the volunteers done. This was a test plot we had put out there a couple of months before, but you can see the newly laid bags is the most apparent thing you see there. And again, they're all walking in a line because they're walking on those plywood that you can't see. But we did have groups come out from Boeing and the Citadel. We had a bunch of other private citizens that came out. And they were able to help us. It was actually a 3-day. So the first day we were prepping material, like wrapping the pallets and getting the bag shell delivered and things. And then the second day was this install. And then the third day, we actually went out with DNR and a few more volunteers and started laying down some of our markers so that we could monitor the project over and over again.
Did you remove the plywood then?
Yes, on the third day we did. I don't know who asked that question, but yes. And just another picture. This is the volunteers from that second day event. So there was quite a few folks. That's impressive. Yeah, I was standing up on the dock, and how clean they are. I was standing up on the dock with a kind of like a karaoke speaker, and I would talk through the microphone so everybody could hear me, and then I would play music in between. So it wasn't just me talking the whole time, and I didn't sing. I'm not a singer. So this is actually an image of the site. So I mentioned there's the causeway. So this way is Breach Inlet. This way is Charleston Harbor. There are 2 docks. Goldbug is a private property. So the causeway and the boat ramp are there for use by their members. The public can't use this, but it still sees quite a bit of traffic out there. And again, all those boats coming by on the Intercoastal Waterway. So what you see in the image is the red bar is the oyster reef that we installed. The image is old and shows around the time of install. The yellow line actually was where the vegetation line was when we installed the reef in 2016. And then the purple line is where the vegetation actually moved to by the time we did our last monitoring in 2021. And then it might be hard to see, but there's some little green islands. So we saw a forward movement of the vegetation. That happens when you get the sediment to the right elevation. If there's existing vegetation there that's healthy, it will move on rhizomes once you get the right elevation. So that's what we did. We put in the reef and we slow that water down. It's like I said, like a little speed bump. So the water goes over the reef, and when it slows down, it drops the sediment out on the backside of the reef. And so that's what raises that elevation. And then the rhizomes just move forward. And so that's how we saw that movement from the yellow line to the purple line. But what we also see are the elevation kind of settles out in certain areas. It normally starts around the middle of the reef. So this is where we saw the first section was that biggest clump, where it starts making these little islands. And then over time, we want to see those islands and that forward movement of that marsh kind of line all start to merge together. Okay, so again, a picture just showing what it looked like at the time of install. You can see where we had the impact we made in front of the reef, where those full sheets of plywood were located. And then if you squint, you can kind of see the poles I was talking about that we installed with DNR on that third day, because we wanted to measure how much sediment actually did accrete. And this is one way of doing it. So we drove their steel poles to a certain depth, that's wherever they stopped, and then we measure how much is sticking up out of the mud. And every time we go back, we measure how much is sticking up out of the mud, and we can tell how much sediment is accreting in different places. So this is what the project looked like in 2021. So again, we have that kind of line of forward movement, but then we also have these little islands. And at this point, these are the rods we had driven in with DNR. They're growing oysters. They're growing oysters. So we were very happy to see over the 5 years, like I said, we had 3-inch oysters in about 8 months on the project. There's a lot of water moving through this area. So the water from Beach Inlet, the water from Charleston Harbor, there's a lot of food available for oysters. Does anybody know how oysters feed? They don't run around. So they basically are open when it's high tide and the water moves around them. So they suck in the water and they'll use their gills and they'll basically filter out the food and then they squirt out the water. Okay, so it's not like they can run around and look for their food. It's what is brought to them, what is available to them to filter. They are filter feeders. FYI, if you eat them, they are filter feeders. I eat them. I think they taste yummy, but it's very important that you know where they come from, when they're harvested, that it's a healthy water body, because they are filtering that water. But they can filter 50 gallons a day, one the size of, say, the palm of your hand. So it's a pretty big oyster, but that's a lot of water for one oyster. So we were very happy to see these results. Like I said, oyster growth was happening fast and repetitively, so that's a good sign. Marsh grass was moving forward, and we basically had an MOU with the property owners to monitor for 5 years. But then we went out the next year, and we've almost completely filled in that 6th year. We've almost seen a complete fill-in of that marsh. All right, so that's what, those mass amounts of marsh is what helps with wave impacts, to the upland properties, helps to reduce the energy. Again, we started out with a 1.5 foot high speed bump. But what we have heard from the people that are members there, that are there all the time, because they go have happy hour, and they'll watch the area. And they've said they have definitely seen an increase in birds that are feeding, so on bait fish, things like that. They have noted they're catching a lot more bigger fish out there than in recent years before we put the project in. So those all are good signs to me. We feel like this is a great project. It's in a very high traffic area. So if you're ever out that way on a boat, take a look. It's really hard to see. If you're ever driving over the swing bridge, it's kind of hard to see, but what you can see is that there's one side of the causeway where the grass comes out to a nice point, and then the other side you can still kind of see that erosional pattern, so it's a good comparison that you can see. So now we're gonna stop talking about gold bug. And So it is projects like Goldbug that got the attention of the property owners and coastal managers. So we've been working on these types of projects since 2009, but DNR has been working on their own oyster restoration efforts since the late 90s. So these are great examples and have a long-standing history in our state. So with that in mind, DHEC actually initiated a 5-year process to develop a living shoreline permit for South Carolina property owners. Working with DNR to help develop like a best management practice document. They were able to then provide that to DHEC, and then they used that to create the language that was released back in May 2021 and was totally adopted. So if you were interested in a living shoreline, there's now permit language available for you to utilize. So with that new language came a 3-prong education resource for the property owners. DHEC updated their website with new permitting information, and we worked really closely with Clemson, who actually led the charge to develop a comprehensive website, and we worked on the development of a coastal siting decision support tool, and so that's what you see located there, and the link to that is down here on the bottom. But if you're interested in that or the Clemson, I'm happy to email those to you and send that information so you can have that. So the South Carolina Living Shoreline application is this tool that I talk about. It's the first place you can go if you say, you know, I have a coastal property, marshfront, not beachfront. I have a marshfront property, I'm experiencing erosion or I'm concerned about erosion, I need to see if a living shoreline is right for me. That's the first place you can go. Put in your address and it'll tell you. It gives a couple of different rankings based on energy. And then you can print out a map if you do decide to move forward and take that map with you into a pre-application meeting with DHEC and the Army Corps to have conversations about what materials might work for your property.
Will that shoreline eventually overtake your barrier and move out in front of it? Do you see that happening?
Of the projects I've done, I've never seen it completely overtake an active oyster reef. So we did one project where we only used bag shell and it completely got sedimented over. And so the grass eventually did start growing on top of what would have been the reef, but there weren't active living oysters coming out of that. So the project was not successful in growing oysters, but the intent was to reduce the erosion at that site. So we achieved that objective. And so that's the only one where I've actually seen it grow over. Normally, the problem is if you get a place that has high sedimentation rate, you could potentially lose the backside of your oyster reef, but I've never seen it come up over the front. So I have seen it. So we have another project on Botany Island where they're experiencing erosion on their beachfront, but the project's on the back marsh side. But when they have these slugs of erosion that takes the sand off, we're actually capturing it on the backside where our project is. So the elevation raised a lot faster than we'd ever seen at a project on the backside of the reefs. So we have the grass that have moved up, but that project has sections of reef instead of like a long line like Goldbug. So the grass has moved directly up to the backside of all those segments, but it's not made it over. So we've never seen it go up and over the reef, with the exception of that one bag shell reef on Wadmalaw that got sedimented completely over. So this is the Boyd Living Shoreline Project. This is the website I mentioned, nature.org/Boyd Shoreline. It's going to also be on this flyer if you take one. And we call this the Boyd Living Shoreline Project because we are receiving over $1 million in funding, and the majority of that funding is coming from the Susan and Darnell Boyd Foundation. They're out of Columbia, but they did have an interest in some coastal work. So if you ever go to Columbia, you might see a fountain. You might have heard of an island. They fund a lot of things, but they've never funded coastal work before. So we were really excited that they wanted to make that change, make that new funding opportunity available for us, and they are very interested. Darnell is no longer with us, but Miss Susan is. She's been out to the site. Actually, the day we took this picture, she was on the boat. The sheriff's department took us out on their boat to ride around and look. So she's really excited about this, and really excited at the opportunity of us working with Georgetown in the community. So our main goal for this project is to reduce the site-specific erosion while designing a project that would create marine habitat and also eventually blend into the surroundings and kind of mimic a healthy marsh. If you remember that Project Green Shore picture, you can't tell that they put down clumps of dirt, that they put down piles of rock. It just kind of blends into that scenery, and that's what we're looking for with this one. So the community engagement has been a primary consideration for us since the planning process for this project began. As a result, we offered multiple input opportunities from the community and provided several tools and resources from them. But due to COVID, we weren't able to host a large community meeting. Normally, we would go into a community and say, hold a meeting at a church or a library or something and say, anybody and everybody come out here. We were not able to do that during COVID. So what we did is we actually recruited folks in the form of what we call community ambassadors, and Dwight here with the library is one of those community ambassadors. So we were able to have a group of about 25 folks from the community, and then we wanted them to represent, to actually help bring the information back to the community, but also come into meetings that we would hold and ask for input and feedback on the design of the project, as well as anybody that participated in our, we did actually send out a community survey. So we had signs all throughout Morgan Park. Did anybody ever see one of our signs in Morgan Park? Yes. So, so we actually did put out a community survey. And then we're able to have kind of all of that before we ever even started designing the project. We wanted to know how was the park used, what were the primary uses, then we wanted to think about from the engineering and science standpoint, how do we bring in a more natural solution to working with erosion. So we've been, I think, very successful. So we've also presented this project by Zoom during city council meetings, if anybody has ever seen any of those. Because we did have to have approval from the community to do the project, although the community is not paying any money for the project. It's totally being funded by Boyd, and then the Boeing is actually paying a little bit of funding as well. Let's see here if I'm missing, if I'm missing anything. So we have submitted our permit application in January, and since we've been waiting on that, we have continued to work through the community. So one thing that we've done recently is made a connection with Carvers Bay High School, and they have a carpentry program. So our intent is to work with the students to help build portions of the project that I'll go over in just a minute. And then we also want to think about how we might work with the community to help install a portion. For anyone not aware, Morgan Park has some gators. So we're not wanting to put people out in the water, except for the Coastal Carolina University is doing the monitoring, so they take their students out there. But that's their liability to supervise those students. But when we do the install, we do want to work with the high school to help build a portion. We'll work with marine contractors to install everything in the water, but I do want to think about a portion that we might be able to have community input and help, so keep an eye out for that. We'll be sharing that probably, hopefully, through the library. Once we get our permit.
Who did you submit that? Who do you submit?
It's a joint application that goes to the Department of Health through their coastal section, and then it also goes to the Army Corps of Engineers. But every permit that comes into them gets directly fed over to DNR, so DNR does get direct feedback to those, but technically the joint application goes to DHEC and the Army Corps.
And you've been waiting 9 months.
Yes, we're giving it a year. So because, again, it is a very new living shoreline permit, but a portion of our project you'll see is a breakwater. So we did have to get some special exceptions to be considered under a nationwide 54 that the Army Corps issues. So we wanted to be the first ones, and we knew it was going to take some time. So we're giving it a year. I was hoping it'd be 6 months, but we're giving it a year, so we're still on track. So we are working on a 3-year timeline that started in January of 2021. So here I've noted some of the high points, but it's by no means everything that we're doing. But to start out in the first year, we hired our engineering firm, Sir Robinson Design Engineers and Moffitt and Nickel are pairing up to help us design and manage the construction of the project. And so the construction, we actually had like our own team. that we started moving through to help think about the design. And that included the city engineer, Orlando from Georgetown, Dr. Till Honbooth from Coastal Carolina University, and our engineers, as well as TNC staff. So we're also working closely, like I said, with Coastal Carolina University with Paul Gaze and Keith Walters. They're the ones that bring their students out and offer them to the gator gods. But they are doing things like monitoring the biological and the physical components of the site before we build the project, and then they'll do the same after. And so we don't have funding for long-term monitoring, but my hope and intent was to bring them on board and get them interested so that Paul and Keith would continue to bring their students out to the site for a longer-term monitoring effort, and the potential for them to use it with school projects. So I think we'll be going in that direction. So we also worked with Pam Martin from Georgetown Rise and the Dyer Institute at Coastal Carolina University to help with the community ambassador program, initially getting that started, the survey that we did. They've just been great help to us on those pieces. So in 2022, like I said, we submitted our permits the beginning of this year. And we've continued that baseline monitoring with Coastal Carolina University. So the biological pieces of like what animals are out there really probably isn't going to change. So they did that a few times and we got a nice sampling. So they're probably not going to continue to do that until after we build the reef. But Paul Gaze's group, his students are actually monitoring those physical components. So they're doing things like side scan sonar, LIDAR, and that is still changing at the site while we're waiting on the permit in these years. We still see changes out there that they are documenting, and will continue to document through construction as well as after construction. And then next year, our goal is to, if we can get it started this year, start construction, start mobilizing equipment, ordering materials, but within 2023, that's our last year, we will have construction completed. And like I said, I do want to think about portions of the project that could be helped by the local community, what pieces. And then we will conduct that post-installation monitoring, which I hope will continue longer into the future. So in preparation for the new Living Shoreline permit, TNC was interested in expanding our work from small-scale projects that say like Gold Bug, up to larger projects. So ideally we wanted to look for something like a ½ acre to 1 acre in size. So to choose our first large-scale site, we went through a multi-step analysis process. So we did a literature review, and we determined our top priorities, sites that have both social vulnerability and ecological value. And so then we gathered some GIS data and created what's called a hotspot. It's basically, so it's this map here. So it's when you start overlaying all the data, and it says, okay, this area has 5 of the 7 criteria you were looking for, kind of thing. So it shows those highest rated areas. So then we got so many in the hotspot analysis for the whole coast of South Carolina that we said we wanted to narrow it down a little bit more. So we overlaid an opportunity zone. Does anybody not know what that is, an opportunity zone? Okay, opportunity zones are areas based on business, and my understanding is that they do receive a tax break for doing businesses that are in opportunity zones. So that was something that we did to help reduce some of the areas we were going to look at in that hotspot analysis by overlaying. So basically you have all of this area was red, and then we put the overlay with the opportunity zone in those. So maybe that narrowed it down to this piece, So that was just helping us narrow down a few more spaces. So then we actually loaded up and said, what are the highest ranked of the highest ranked? So we took like the top 1%. And so then that's when we got this map that's in the middle, and it started noting, here are the areas that rank as highest of the high. And then we did some site visits, and we had some internal conversations, and then we went back to our funder and noted, these are the top 3 spaces we came up with. What piques your interest the most? And they said Georgetown. So we said, great, let's go. So that is actually a picture of Morgan Park down on the end. And you can see there have been numerous trees that have fallen down, in that it is I think I show it in a minute, but it is a bite shape of the shoreline. So this is the tip of the peninsula here. So again, like I said, East Bay is over here. This is the passive piece of Morgan Park. This is the picnic area, the pavilion that you saw, and that observation platform that you saw in those first pictures. So we're specifically going to be working in this, it looks like maybe the shape of a green eye. So that's about 1 acre. And within that, what you'll see is this dark blue line is the low water line. You can see the high water goes all up into the marsh around here. But what I also want to show you is this dot shows where the shoreline was in 2005. So that's where the low tide line is now. And again, like I said, this is a term called a bite. So that is showing us that there is this erosive pattern within that 1 acre site that we're talking about. So we're not planning to lay down 1 acre of material. We're going to do things within that 1 acre, again, with the idea that hopefully it'll fill in that mimicking that marsh over time. And these are just some pictures from the site currently. So you see things like this old exposed marsh edge. You see these roots, the exposed roots there, the trees, the sandy area here with some of those old roots under them. So this is just one of the pieces of material that our design engineers put together for the permit. Just pointing out a couple of things on here. So we do see an erosive pattern, but the project area has a lot of sediment coming to it. So we know we have quite a few rivers coming down, and this is the confluence. So what we're seeing is a sediment supply. So in Pensacola at Project Greenshore, they did not have that. They trucked in sediment and made islands and planted them. We said, there's sediment to be had. What do we need to do to slow it down, like with gold bug, make it settle out in this area? The other thing that we know is there is routine, say, I don't know, 120, 90 degrees, a lot of boat action around that. So when we were thinking about where is the most direct energy coming from, it's multiple areas. You've got fresh water, especially during storms, coming at quite a significant pace down the rivers. You've got boat traffic around that tip quite routinely. And then you do have wind-driven waves that are coming across. So we had to think about multiple directions of energy and how do we combat that. And then we do know that it's being destabilized through vegetation loss. Vegetation can help support holding that sediment in there. So we really want to dampen that wave energy from the boats. We want to promote the deposition of those sediments. And then we want to enhance the natural processes that support the flourishing of the vegetation. So this is our project concept. So this is about like at a 30% design scale. Yes, sir.
Once this is in place, okay, that's marsh pretty much all the way up to where the Coast Guard is. Will that impact up the river from there?
Well, there's a bunch of different ways I could answer that question, but you mean the marsh itself, like the vegetation itself, would that impact it, or?
Sediment down there at where Georgetown Beach is.
Yes.
Okay, you're going to trap sediment there. It's going to widen the shoreline there. Is that going to trap more sediment along the shoreline?
Probably not. Probably not. So what we've seen is normally the sediment containment is kind of at the project area. This is, again, a little bit of a different project. So what we're using here are methods that we've seen in other states that we've seen, and we've not noted in those other states that it has increased, say, the sediment deposition at other areas outside of the project area. But that is one of the questions we will answer, but we don't think it will. We don't think it will. So you have to, if you have other areas that need sediment, you have to think different strategies, I think.
Well, okay, it's all tidal water, so where the sediment?
Yeah.
In my mind, I don't know where the sediment's going to end up because it's tidal water.
Yeah, but like at Gold Bug, we did not, so one concern that the East Cooper Outboard Motor Club had was that the sedimentation would happen on the front side of the reef because they have such a shallow area there by their boat ramp, by their boat docks, that they have to maintenance dredge, they've said. So they were not wanting any sediment to go on the front side. And so our experience had been all sedimentation happens on the back side, the landward side of the reef, and that was still true for that project. So it was very, very project site specific, and it only happened on the back side of the reef, never on the front. So I don't know if you remember, but we did have poles on the front side, and we never measured a difference. It was like maybe a millimeter of difference of sedimentation that occurred. It was all on the back side. So I think it feels very site specific. And this is the assumption that this site will have the same effect. So again, the picnic area, the pavilion, that observation platform. So low water line that we had noted. And so the idea is a three-prong approach of these are breakwaters, sections of breakwater. So if you remember from the Project Green Shores, they used rock that were set out that all the birds were sitting on. So instead, we're thinking about some kind of wood piling form. And then these are what DNR calls manufactured wire reefs. They're basically gabion boxes. They're boxes that are made of wire mesh, something sturdier than chicken wire. But you do make boxes, and we can put inside of that shell or rock or something like that. And this is going to promote a bit more of that habitat value as well. And then we have what we're calling a waddle fencing that's coming along that low tide area. It's called waddle fencing. I'll show you a picture in a second, but it's the idea of using like a low profile kind of wooden based loose fence. Let me show you what that looks like. So there's a picture right there. So it might not be that high. So like I said, right now we're sitting at about a 30% design, and this is what we've proposed. We will see when we get our permit back what they'll let us use, but this is what we've proposed. So assuming they say, we like this, you can move forward, the next step would be to get to the 60 or 90% design and work with the contractors. So we'll definitely want marine contractors to install these pilings, and there is likely going to be, it's a little hard to see, but there may be something woven in between those pilings to help reduce that energy. These are those, like I said, it's a metal-based basket that will have shell or rock or something in it, and then a wood-based waddle fence. It's a low-profile sill.
And how long do you think this is going to hold up down in the water?
So there are pieces of the wood that we do assume are going to have to be part of a maintenance plan. From our research, we've seen that can, excuse me, we've seen that can last somewhere between 5 and 25 years. Depending on what we use and what the site-specific criteria are. So that is, again, another piece that we'll be testing, and that we're working with the city to figure out how to hold money for when that maintenance, assuming the maintenance will happen when it needs to be paid for. So there are different pieces. But again, there are also some pieces we do kind of want to, after 25 years, after 10 years, could be like in the background or be a part of what becomes that more natural piece, of the picture.
Are you intending to do what this is doing down in Charleston, to eventually build out to the wood breakwater?
No, but the wooden breakwater is there to help reduce the energy. So it's likely we may not see vegetation right there because there is going to still be a lot of energy out at that point. But the hope is that we do see a bit more vegetation along the edges where the waddle fencing is. And our long-term goal is to really try to figure out how we might work with the city to get, we'd love to see an observation deck or a fishing pier or something out there, but that's like our long-term goal. But right now, we don't have the waddle fencing completely closing off because we don't want to completely block access. We do know that there are people that go out there and fish. So we don't want to block access from people that want to go in the water with the gators and fish. So that's why the waddle fencing in this, in this image, it doesn't close off completely. It just is around those edges. So our hope is that the vegetation at a minimum is up here. But we do want to see, maybe we'll see some down here. Now, we have seen some examples of these kind of breakwaters in North Carolina where there was vegetation that actually started eventually growing out of the tops of these. And they kind of look like little islands out there. So you'll see the tops of these at high tide. But at high tide, you wouldn't see these pieces. But at low tide, you're likely to see everything. Okay. All right, so I'll end with that and see if anybody has more questions. Yes, sir.
At the present time, most of Morgan Park is surrounded by marsh. It appears what you're doing here is taking the small part of Morgan Park that has a sandy beach and converting that into marsh. Is that correct?
Well, there is marsh there, but the hope is that we will mimic that around it and utilize more of that to help reduce the erosion that's happening at that site. And
why is eliminating the sandy beach a good thing?
well, so the problem with the process that's happening now is that you eventually might not even have that whole tip there. So we've seen the movement. Let me see if I can go back here. All right, so we've seen the movement over time pushing this way. So eventually, up there, there is a concept that we're going to be, if we do nothing, we're going to be losing probably this whole tip down here. And so part of that was, you know, the community, the city said we have this resource and we'd like to see if we can reduce the site erosion.
So there's been a study to show that the whole area would be eliminated if this is not done.
Yeah, yes, so the pattern, you see this bite pattern, it would continue to basically bite and move across.
When would that be completed?
When would the
Be eliminated?
20, 50, 100 years? Depends on how many more storms we get.
I mean, what did the study show?
Yeah, like I said, it depends, right? So it depends on the amount of storms that can occur coming down the river, but it could range 20 years, 100 years.
That's not a sandy beach as we visualize the beach at Pawleys Island. I've been by there a number of times where there's gators laying on that beach.
Yeah, definitely.
This is not a beach that somebody comes down and puts an umbrella and lays on it.
Well, like I said, but the biggest comment we got was well, and at the time we did our surveys, it was saying I fish from here, and you were not allowed to fish from East Park. So that was one thing that we wanted to keep in mind. Again, we didn't pull that waddle fencing all the way over to block that access, but that was one thing that was told to us is we want to continue to fish from that area. So that's why we said, okay, we want this to happen. This will support reducing the erosion. And long term, we'd love, like I said, love to see a pier out over that, if that's something that the city wants to move forward with. Did I answer your question?
I think so.
Okay.
I mean, what you showed, that was 2005,
Mm-hmm.
right? That dotted line, so that's been lost since
Yeah.
2000.
Yeah, and this is very site specific. If you look over here and you look up there, that 2005 line and that low tide line, they haven't changed a lot, except for right here at the park. And part of that reasoning we assumed was vegetation loss, especially on the shores. But also there's a lot of energy coming in on that side. And this is very shallow, where over here, this is part of the Army Corps channel. This is a very deep side. It just basically drops off right here. More questions? Yes, sir?
Does sea level change affect?
Well, so up here in Georgetown, it's not just sea level, but it's also subsidence. Some of the work that Dr. Honbooth is doing, and his work has really been focused in the harbor area, but he's really brought to our attention a bit more of the subsidence issue. So you not only have water raising, but you have land sinking. So that's part of what we're seeing down here in Georgetown when we start seeing the, like at king tides, and the water's getting up higher than folks have ever seen it. From his work, that's my understanding is that's part of the picture that, yes. So we were trying to keep something in mind with rising seas as a design concept, but also thinking about the subsidence that we're seeing in the area.
So will this project protect that whole peninsula with the storm blowing through? Is that part of the benefit?
So what we're seeing with the boat wakes, it's kind of like, not a hurricane, but like a mini storm almost daily. Nothing's going to protect it if we see a Category 3 come through, right? There's a certain threshold that you're accepting, with any any solution that it will or will not. So not with significant storms by any means, but the intent is to really think about how is that the routine impact, and again, most of that's really happening through these wind-driven waves and through boat traffic in the area. That's really our goal of trying to reduce the erosion from those.
On a previous slide, you had some vulnerable areas. I thought also in this whole, are those future projects? Or?
Oh, you're talking about when we did the hotspot analysis? Not at this time, but our goal is to, we've applied for funding through NOAA to really look at the whole South Carolina coast again in kind of an updated version of what we did originally in 29 to site this project and bring in other partners' priorities instead of just TNC's and look at coast-wide where are the highest areas of vulnerability for different reasons, and then where could we site larger projects. And we want to think about 10, 20, 50 acre projects that could really move the needle on this kind of work. That would be seriously awesome. But it is going to require a lot of money and multiple years to do that. So we do hope to do the whole coast again in an updated version at a higher resolution with multiple partners. But that will take about $3 million to do. So we're trying to get that money. Yes, sir.
One of the things that hasn't been clearly stated is that little, loop of trees that you see there is the only real earth. All that rest of the stuff around it, we walk across a bridge to get into Morgan Park, and all the rest of it is just marsh grass. It's all tidal. And what you're doing is saving this little piece of earth.
Yes. So when we did look at the siting the project, there was a version of, is there existing infrastructure that we could try this project out to see how it's going to work as the first 1 acre project. But at the same time, we weren't wanting to pick somebody's house, if that makes sense. So we wanted to pick infrastructure. We wanted to pick a place that we could test a new method and go to a larger scale than had been done before. But our engineers wanted us to kind of not pick somewhere too important as far as infrastructure, right? Because this can, if it is successful, which we assume it will be, can feed into other projects. Like I think about, it'd be great to do something at Plum Island in Charleston. They're right there on the harbor. They're getting beat down all the time. They've got a portion of one of their ponds that's already getting impacts of waves daily. But that is a different level of engineering. So with the funds that we had and with the siting that we did, it was kind of a give and take of how you site it. But we did want there to be some form of infrastructure, and the community was interested in how can we reduce the erosion and keep Morgan Park a bit longer than maybe we could if it wasn't there.
Has the Nature Conservancy thought even bigger beyond this kind of a project to an ocean project, away from traditional dredging?
We do have work that we do in the ocean. A lot of that right now is based around our fisheries work and hard bottoms and wind sighting, things like that. But not so much thinking of, I think some of you saw, we have the Smart Reef project off South Carolina. So that kind of hasn't been in our wheelhouse. As far as shoreline stabilization, it's been more marsh focused.
Yeah,
But we do have work that's happening in the ocean, but it's at a different kind of interest level.
Joy, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Like I said, an exciting part of what's happening in Georgetown, and get to understand and see what's going to, and hopefully success on getting the permissions, the permits, and to be able to move ahead. Look forward to that. As I had mentioned earlier, we've got a full schedule for Tuesdays With in the back, if you'd like to pick up a copy of that. Next month, the third Tuesday in October, which is October 18th, the Stores of Front Street, Stories of Georgetown Black Merchants. A very important, interesting part of Georgetown's history as we think about Front Street. You may recall a year ago we had a presentation on the Jewish community's ownership of stores along Front Street, and another very important component of that is the Black family's ownership of stores along Front Street. That'll be next month with Lily Jean Johnson, who is here. Thank you, Lily Jean. Nice to see you. Leading a special guest panel. Did I say that well? Does that work well to introduce that group? A number of people are going to be joining her for a discussion of that part of our history as well. Also to mention a couple of other upcoming events. We have a couple traditional events coming up. The week, I always define it as the week before the boat show. We have a community yard sale the second weekend of October, which this year will be on October 8th. We have a community yard sale. If you're interested, this is a great way to get rid of stuff at your house. It's relatively inexpensive. We take care of all the advertising. We do the setup. You're out back. I'm pointing in the right direction. Yes, back here in the parking lot beside the courthouse and behind the library. A lot of good things to purchase that day from 8 o'clock in the morning till noon. A lot of people from the community are here. We have food. We've got all kinds of things. We'll have a book table for those of you who are missing the book table at the farmer's market. We'll have a book we'll have a book table there, and just hope you'll take advantage of that on Saturday, October 8th. And then the second Saturday in December, thinking way ahead, our major fundraiser for the year is our annual Yuletide home tour. We're very excited about that. On the second Saturday, December 10th, we'll be having a number of homes. We're looking at about 10 homes in the Georgetown community that are especially open, decorated for the holidays, and we'll have that as well as 2 houses of worship. And we're adding another dimension to it this year. We're having what we have to come up with always fancy names, Museum Merriment. We're working with local museums in town, partnering with them, and from 11 o'clock in the morning till 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a number of the museums are partnering with us, including the Gullah Museum, the South Carolina Maritime Museum, the County Museum, and and the Kaminsky House Museum. I thought there's one more, I don't want to forget it. And all of them will be open specially for participants in the Yuletide home tour from 11 o'clock in the morning till 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then the tour itself is from 1 to 5. We'll be selling tickets beginning the middle of October, and we're excited about that and hope that you'll put that on your calendar. October 8th, December 10th, and October 18th. Did I get it all right? I think that's all the dates we want to have. But we hope you'll be able to participate with us, and we look forward to seeing you again. Joy, thank you so very much. And we'll keep everybody updated, too, communicating through the Friends as well as Dwight's participation in the program to be able to keep you up to date as to what's happening. So we're past the 6 months, but we're not up to 12 months, but we'll get that permit, and we'll hear what's going on. And if you haven't been out recently, go on out and take a look. It is really, it's a beautiful area of Georgetown, and named after our former mayor here. And so, again, thanks all. Joy, thanks.